CreepyCorner stories.
Hey everyone, welcome back to CreepyCorner stories. You know, diving into the dark web is always risky, but sharing these stories with you makes it worth it. I'm curious, where are you watching this from right now? Let me know in the comments below. I've noticed that these kinds of stories hit differently depending on where you are. It might even make the experience a little creepier. So, tell me, are you watching from the safety of your home or somewhere less secure? My dad used to work for a private government facility. I found his old hard drive, and it contained footage of experiments on people who look like me. I don't even know how to start this without sounding completely insane. But screw it. I need to get this out there. So, a little background. My dad was a software engineer, not the working from home in sweatpants kind. He did high security government contract work. He never told me much about it, always brushing it off with, "It's just boring IT stuff, kid." But I knew it was deeper than that. He died 2 years ago. Heart attack. Out of nowhere. No family history. No warnings. Just gone. And when we buried him, we buried whatever secrets he was keeping. Or at least, that's what I thought. Last month, my mom asked me to clean out his old office. She wanted to turn it into a guest room. That's when I found the hard drive. A hard drive that wasn't supposed to exist. It was tucked inside a locked drawer in his desk. A drawer I had to pry open with a screwdriver because we couldn't find the key. At first, I thought it was just some old work backups, or maybe his personal files. The thing was ancient. One of those bulky, industrial-grade external drives. Black casing, no brand name. Just a red sticker on top that said Project Syntax in my dad's handwriting. I plugged it into my laptop. No password protection. Just a single folder named Syntax Logs. And inside, dozens of video files. The first one was dated July 17th, 2009, the year I turned 9. I clicked on it, and that's when I realized I was looking at something I was never supposed to see. The footage. The video started with a wide shot of a sterile, windowless room, the kind you see in interrogation scenes in movies. Fluorescent lighting, steel table, a single chair. But in this case, the chair had straps, and someone was sitting in it. A kid. I swear to God, he looked just like me. Same messy brown hair, same gap in his front teeth, same nervous habit of tapping his fingers against his leg. He was barefoot, wearing a thin hospital gown, and he looked terrified. Then a voice spoke from behind the camera. Deep, calm, clinical. Subject 16. Cognitive response test. Initiating sequence. A low humming sound started in the background. The kid flinched. He started blinking rapidly, like he was trying to fight something off. Then he screamed. Not a normal scream. This was a full-body, primal kind of scream, like something inside him was breaking. His nose started bleeding. His eyes rolled back. The veins in his neck bulged as his entire body convulsed. And then, just as fast as it started, he stopped. His body slumped forward. His breathing was shallow. And as the camera zoomed in, I saw something that made my stomach drop. His eyes were completely black. Not just the pupils, the entire eye. Then the video cut out. The sickest part? The next file was dated 2 weeks later. And in it, the same kid was back in the chair. Completely fine. No bruises, no blood, nothing. Like it had never happened. But I knew what I saw. And the deeper I went, the worse it got. kids disappearing mid-experiment, their bodies contorting in impossible ways, some of them screaming in languages I didn't recognize, others just staring, not blinking, not breathing, and in every single video, they all had one thing in common. They all looked like me, not just similar, identical, same scars, same birthmark on the side of my neck, same everything. I was looking at myself, over and over again, except I didn't remember any of this. So what the hell did that mean? And why was my dad involved? Then I found the last file. It was different from the rest, newer, dated 2 weeks before my dad died. And this time, the person sitting in the chair wasn't a kid. It was an adult, still strapped down, still terrified, still bleeding from the nose. But when the camera zoomed in, I realized I was looking at someone I knew very, very well, because the man in the chair was my dad. I don't remember how long I sat there, just staring at the screen. My breath was coming too fast. My hands were shaking so bad, I nearly knocked my laptop off the desk. I felt like my brain was rejecting what I was seeing, like my body was trying to convince me this was all some kind of sick joke. Because if it wasn't, if this was real, then that meant my dad wasn't just involved in something horrific. It meant he had been a victim of it, too. I clicked on the video. Timestamp, October 3rd, 2021, 9:45 p.m. The footage was grainy, the way security camera feeds are, but I could still make everything out clearly. The same metal chair, the same white-walled room, the same suffocating feeling that something was very, very wrong. But the person strapped into the chair wasn't some nameless child this time. It was him, my dad. His wrists were bound so tight the skin had gone purple. His ankles, too. His clothes were different. He wasn't in a hospital gown like the others. He was in a suit, but it was torn and soaked in sweat. His head lolled forward, his hair sticking to his forehead like he had been there for hours, maybe days. Then the voice spoke again, that same calm, professional voice from the other recordings. Subject 1, A, Phase 4, Final Sequence. My dad's breathing hitched. His head snapped up, and for the first time, I saw his face. And that's when I stopped breathing, because he looked horrified. I don't mean regular fear. I mean beyond fear. I mean the kind of terror that hollows you out from the inside, the kind that makes your body forget how to function. His lips were moving. He was saying something, begging, but there was no sound, like someone had muted the audio. And then, just like the other videos, it started. The low, vibrating hum. At first, nothing happened. His body tensed, his fingers twitching, like he was trying to fight against whatever was happening. His eyes flicked from side to side, frantic, looking for something. Someone. Anyone. Then he gasped. His back arched so violently, I heard his spine crack. His face twisted in pain. His veins bulged. His breathing turned ragged and erratic, like he couldn't get enough air. His mouth opened in a silent scream, so wide I thought his jaw might dislocate. But that wasn't the worst part. The worst part was his eyes. They weren't just turning black like the kids in the other videos. They were bleeding. Thick, inky liquid poured down his cheeks, dripping from his chin, pooling in his lap. His nose, too. His ears. His fingernails cracked and peeled back as his hands clenched into fists. And then his head snapped back, like something inside him had burst. For a full 10 seconds, he was completely still. Then his mouth moved again. Only this time, it wasn't silent. This time, the sound cut through the speakers, like a knife. Not words, not human, It was a screech, a distorted, garbled mess of noise that didn't belong to this world. It wasn't just a scream. It was many screams at once. Like 100 voices were trapped inside his throat, all shrieking to get out. Then the video cut to black. But that wasn't the end. There was another file, a second video. Exactly 1 minute after the first one ended, I didn't want to open it. My body was already rejecting everything I had just seen. My brain was screaming at me to stop, to unplug the hard drive and burn it, to pretend none of this ever happened. But I had to know. So I clicked. The screen was dark at first. No sound, just static. Then, movement. Someone was standing in front of the camera, not strapped into the chair. Standing, tall, still, watching. And I swear on everything. I swear on my own life. It was my dad. His clothes were drenched in black. His eyes were hollow. 2 endless pits where pupils should be. But he was alive. Or at least, something that looked like him was. He tilted his head, like he was looking through the screen, like he could see me. Then he spoke. "It's not over." Then the file corrupted, and that was it. But that's not the worst part. I sat there in silence, my entire body numb. I didn't know how long I had been watching. The only thing I knew was that I needed to get the hell out of that room. I needed air. I needed space. So I closed my laptop and stood up. And then my phone buzzed. I looked down, expecting a notification. Maybe a spam email. Maybe a Twitter alert. But it wasn't that. It was a text message from a blocked number. A single sentence. "Stop digging, or you'll end up in the chair next." My stomach turned to ice. My skin crawled. Because I wasn't connected to the internet. I hadn't told anyone what I found. And the worst part? As I stood there, shaking, gripping my phone so hard my knuckles turned white, I felt something behind me. Something watching. And when I turned around, I swear for half a second, I saw my dad standing in the hallway. But his eyes were all wrong. They were black, and he was smiling. I didn't sleep that night. I couldn't. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw it. His face, standing there in the dark hallway, not moving, just watching. I didn't scream. I didn't run. I didn't do anything. I just stood there, frozen, my brain refusing to believe what my eyes were seeing, because it was impossible. My dad was dead. We buried him. I saw the body. I carried the goddamn casket. But that thing in my hallway, it was him. Or at least something that looked like him. Then I blinked, and he was gone. Like he had never been there at all. The texts kept coming. I locked my bedroom door, even though I knew it wouldn't do anything. I sat on my bed, gripping my phone so hard I thought I might crack the screen. The message was still there. "Stop digging, or you'll end up in the chair next." I reread it over and over, like I was waiting for the words to change, for it to be some kind of hallucination. Then my phone vibrated. Another text. This one was worse. It was a video. A grainy 10-second clip, shot from outside my house, through my bedroom window. It was me, sitting on my bed, staring at my phone. The file name was just a timestamp. 3:33 a.m. Who the hell was outside my house at 3:33 in the morning, recording me? I didn't think. I ran to my window, shoved the curtains aside, expecting to see someone standing there. Some lunatic with a camera. Some proof that this was all just some elaborate prank. But there was nothing. Just my backyard, empty and silent. Except something was off. The air felt heavier. The night felt wrong, like the world had tilted just slightly off its axis. Then my phone vibrated again. I looked down. one final message. You shouldn't have opened the hard drive. I felt something move behind me, a shift in the air, a presence, and I swear to God, swear on everything, I felt someone breathe against my neck. I spun around so fast, I nearly tripped over myself, my back slamming against the window. But my room was empty. At least I thought it was, until I looked at my laptop. The screen was on, even though I had closed it, even though I had unplugged the hard drive. There was a single file open, a live feed, the same sterile white room, the same metal chair, but it wasn't empty this time. Someone was sitting in it, tied down, struggling. It was me, the man in the mask. I don't remember much after that. I remember grabbing my car keys, running out of the house, getting in my car, hands shaking so bad I could barely fit the key in the ignition. I didn't know where I was going. I just knew I had to go. The roads were empty. The streetlights blurred past me. My pulse was hammering so hard it felt like my skull was going to crack open. And then I saw headlights in my rearview mirror. A black SUV. No plates. I turned onto a side road. It followed. I sped up. It sped up. Every turn I took, it was right there, matching my speed perfectly. Then my phone started ringing. An unknown number. I didn't answer. I couldn't. Then the SUV's high beams flipped on, blinding me. I slammed the brakes. The SUV skidded to a stop behind me. For 3 long seconds, nothing happened. Then the driver's side door opened. A man stepped out, dressed in all black, face hidden behind a smooth, featureless mask. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't think. He started walking toward me, slow, controlled, like he already knew how this was going to end. I threw the car in reverse, slammed the gas. The engine roared, but the car didn't move. I tried again. Nothing. My hands were sweating, slipping against the wheel. My chest tightened. He was getting closer. Then he stopped, tilted his head, and lifted something in his hand. A phone. My phone. He held it up for me to see. Then he answered the call, and I swear to God, I heard my own voice on the other end. Then everything went black. I woke up in the room, the same one from the videos. White walls, fluorescent lights, and the chair. I was strapped into it. My wrists, my ankles, my chest, tight, cutting into my skin. I tried to scream, but my throat was raw, dry. Then I heard the hum, low, vibrating through my bones. Then a voice, that same calm, clinical voice from before. Subject 2, A, Phase 1, initiating sequence. Then the pain started, deep, crawling through my veins like ice, like something was inside me, twisting, burrowing, rewriting. I couldn't breathe. My lungs felt like they were collapsing. My vision blurred. My thoughts started to scatter. And then I saw him, standing in the doorway. My dad. Number. The thing wearing his face. He smiled. His teeth were too sharp. Too many. Then he whispered something. And even through the pain, even through the static filling my brain, I heard it clearly. We were never real. Then everything went dark. But that's not the worst part. I woke up in my bed, like nothing had happened, like it was all just some horrible dream. But my wrists were bruised, my ankles raw, and sitting on my nightstand was the mask the man had been wearing, black, featureless, and inside it was a note, scrawled in my dad's handwriting. Run. The mask sat on my nightstand, motionless, featureless, black as a starless sky. But I swear to God, it was watching me. My dad's handwriting on the note was unmistakable. The ink looked fresh, like he had just written it, like he had stood right there in my room while I was unconscious. But he was dead. I buried him, didn't I? I couldn't think straight. My body still felt wrong, like it had been taken apart and put back together in the wrong order. My muscles ached, my skin crawled. I stood up on shaking legs and grabbed the mask. It was cold, too cold. Then I turned it over. There was something inside. A Polaroid photo of me, but it wasn't a picture I recognized. I was wearing different clothes, standing in a sterile white hallway. The facility. My stomach clenched. My pulse spiked, because there was something else in the photo. A reflection, a window behind me, catching my silhouette. But the reflection wasn't me. It was something else. Something taller, darker, distorted. And it was smiling. The mirror shouldn't have lied. I stumbled into the bathroom, flicked on the light, and grabbed the sink to keep myself from collapsing. My breath came too fast, too shallow. I had to calm down. I had to tell myself this was just exhaustion or stress, or maybe I had finally lost my goddamn mind. Then I looked up at the mirror and froze. My reflection was wrong, not by much, just slightly off. The angles were sharper. The skin looked too smooth, like I was a wax figure, not a person. And my eyes, they weren't just staring back. They were studying me. Then it blinked, but I didn't. A second too late. Out of sync. My whole body went cold. I took a step back. So did the reflection. But there was a hesitation, a delay. I raised my right hand. It raised its left. Then it grinned. And I didn't. I ran. The house wasn't safe anymore. I grabbed my keys, my phone, my wallet, stuffed everything into my pockets and bolted for the front door. My brain was screaming that this wasn't real, that I was dreaming, but my gut was suffocating on the truth. I felt it. Something was wrong with me. Something was inside me. I threw open the door and stopped dead. The street was gone. No houses, no cars, no streetlights. Just endless, suffocating blackness, like the world had been erased. A thick, inky void stretched out in every direction. It wasn't night. It wasn't anything. It was nothing. I turned, gasping, heart slamming against my ribs. But my house was gone too. I was standing in the middle of the void, alone. Number not alone, because there was something standing in front of me. Something wearing my face, the thing that looked like me. It was perfect, a perfect copy. My height, my building, my scars. But I knew it wasn't me. Its skin didn't move right, like it wasn't flesh, like it was something wearing flesh. Then it spoke, in my voice. You weren't supposed to wake up. My ears rang, my lungs seized. The thing took a step closer. They let you go too soon. I backed away, but there was nowhere to go. It kept coming, slow, patient, like it had all the time in the world. But don't worry. It tilted its head. We can still fix it. And then it lunged. The memory that wasn't mine. The moment it touched me, everything broke. I wasn't in the void anymore. I wasn't anywhere. I was remembering. Flashes of something I shouldn't know. White corridors, men in masks, screaming. I saw myself, except it wasn't me. It was another me, strapped down, struggling. I saw wires in my head. I saw something crawling beneath my skin. I saw them open me up, peeling back my scalp, peeling back more than that. I saw what was inside, and it wasn't human. It was never human. The truth, I wasn't supposed to know the facility, the experiments, the copies. I wasn't the first. I wasn't even me. I was one of them. I had always been one of them. Every version before me had failed. I was just the next attempt, a better version, a refinement. And now they were taking me back. I woke up in the chair. The real world snapped back into place. like a rubber band. Fluorescent lights burned my retinas. The cold metal dug into my skin. Straps, tight, holding me down. I tried to scream, but my throat was raw. Then I saw them, the men in black masks, standing in the corners, watching. Then a door opened, and someone walked in. I swear on my life, it was my dad. He stood over me, expressionless, studying me like a failed experiment. Then he reached into his pocket, pulled out something small, a mirror, and he held it up to my face. My heart stopped, because the thing in the reflection wasn't me anymore. It was something else, something twisting, something smiling. Then my dad sighed and whispered the last words I would ever hear. Reset it. And then, darkness. I woke up in my bed. Again, like nothing had happened. Like the last 48 hours had been nothing more than a fever dream. But my body told a different story. My wrists were bruised, raw from the straps. My throat burned like I had been screaming for hours. My muscles ached like something had been pulling me apart, piece by piece, and putting me back together wrong. I sat up, gasping, drenched in sweat. The mirror across from my bed caught my reflection, and that's when I realized something was wrong. Something was missing. I didn't recognize myself. The face looking back at me was mine, but it wasn't. The skin was too smooth. The eyes were too glossy. The angles were just slightly off, like a bad copy, like something mimicking a human, but not quite getting it right. I blinked. The reflection didn't. My stomach dropped. Then it smiled. The house wasn't my house anymore. I scrambled out of bed, heart hammering against my ribs, and tore open my bedroom door. And the hallway was different. Wrong. Longer. Too long. The walls stretched endlessly in both directions, lined with doors that shouldn't be there. The air was heavy, thick, electric, like a storm was pressing against the walls, waiting to be let in. Then I heard it. A voice, not from one of the rooms, from inside me. You're awake too soon. I slapped my hands over my ears, but it didn't help. It was inside my skull. You weren't supposed to wake up. I stumbled backward, my vision warped, the walls bending and twisting like something was trying to force me back under. I turned to run and nearly slammed into myself. Standing there, in the middle of the hallway, was me. A perfect copy, except it wasn't. Its eyes were black, not just the pupils, the entire eye. It tilted its head, studying me, like I was the imposter. Then it opened its mouth, and my voice came out. Go back to sleep. It lunged. The world outside didn't exist. I ran, down the endless hallway, past the impossible doors. Some of them were open. I made the mistake of looking inside. One room was filled with beds, rows and rows of metal-framed hospital cots, and in each one, me. Hundreds of me, all strapped down, all motionless, except for one. One of them turned its head, and it whispered in my voice, "It's not real." I slammed the door and kept running. Another door, another glimpse inside. This time, a giant floor-to-ceiling mirror, and in the reflection, I saw something behind me, something tall, something wrong, something wearing my skin like a suit. I ran harder. Then I saw the exit, a single door at the end of the hallway, metal, heavy, a red exit sign glowing above it. I slammed into it, fumbling with the handle. Locked. Of course it was, but I felt it, the thing behind me, crawling closer. I pounded on the door. Let me out! Let me out! Let me out! Then, a click. The door swung open, and I was somewhere else. I was back in the facility, the real one. White walls, fluorescent lights, and I wasn't alone. Men in black masks stood around me. Still, Silent. Then a voice spoke. Deep, calm, familiar. Subject 2 has reawakened prematurely. A figure stepped forward, and my heart stopped, because it was my dad, or something wearing him. His face was right, but his eyes weren't. He smiled. "It's time to go back to sleep," I screamed, and everything went black. The final truth. I woke up in my bed, again, like nothing had happened, but this time, I knew. This time, I remembered. I wasn't real. I never had been. I was one of them. A test. A copy. A failed version of something trying to become perfect. And the ones before me, the ones I saw strapped to those beds, they were still sleeping, waiting, and soon, they were going to wake up too. But that's not the worst part. I checked my phone. One new message. A video. I tapped it open with shaking hands. The camera was pointed at me. Sleeping. But the timestamp was from tomorrow. Then the screen glitched, and for half a second, I saw something standing over my bed. Something wearing my face. Something grinning. Then the video cut to black, and a single message appeared on the screen. Resetting. I found a dark web map of abandoned military tunnels. One of them runs directly beneath my apartment. Okay, so I know how this is gonna sound. Like one of those fake horror stories where some dude stumbles across some super secret deep website and bad things start happening. But this is real. Or at least, I think it's real. And if it is, I might be completely screwed. So, I should probably start from the beginning. I've always been fascinated with weird internet rabbit holes, lost media, strange forums, deep web mysteries. I'm not talking about the super illegal stuff. I just like to explore. There's something about knowing that there's an entire hidden side of the internet most people never see that really interests me. A few weeks ago, I found this forum while scrolling through some old threads on r/deep web experiences. It was called The Silent Archives, and it was full of posts about abandoned places, missing people, and creepy urban legends that never made the mainstream. A lot of it was your typical conspiracy theory garbage, but one post caught my attention. It was titled, Abandoned Military Tunnel Systems, Worldwide Access. The post was vague, but the user, whose account had since been deleted, had uploaded a link to a site on the dark web. They claimed it was an interactive map of forgotten underground structures, bunkers, tunnels, even Cold War-era missile silos. The guy said the data was pulled from old military records and classified leaks, and that some of the tunnels were still in use. Of course, I was curious. Now, I've been on the dark web before, not for anything crazy, mostly just to see what's out there. I have a VPN, a virtual machine, all that. So I copied the link into my Tor browser, expecting it to be a dead page like most old deep web links. But it wasn't. The site loaded instantly. No login, no captcha, just a black screen with red text. Welcome to the archive. Then the map appeared. It looked like a regular satellite view of the world, like something you'd see on Google Earth, but with hundreds of red dots scattered across different countries. The US had tons of them, especially in places like Nevada, Virginia, and Colorado. But there were also dots in places I didn't expect. Suburbs, forests, major cities. There was even one in my city. I zoomed in, and my stomach dropped. The red dot was directly beneath my apartment building, not just near it, not a few streets away, directly underneath me. I suddenly felt really uncomfortable, like I was being watched, but I told myself it was just a weird coincidence. My city has a lot of old infrastructure, so maybe it was just some forgotten storm drain or something. Still, my curiosity got the better of me. The site had a search function, so I typed in my city's name. A few results popped up, but one caught my eye. Site 117, Decommissioned Facility, 1987, Restricted Access. I clicked it. A small window opened with a grainy black and white photo. It showed a narrow tunnel with curved concrete walls, dimly lit by a single hanging bulb. There were no descriptions, no notes, just a date. Lost, modified, February 11th, 2024. That was 3 days ago. My heart started pounding. If this place was decommissioned in 1987, why had someone updated the entry this week? I clicked back to the map and tried zooming in on the exact location of the tunnel's entrance. To my surprise, it wasn't in some restricted government building or some off-limits area. It was in the basement of an old, abandoned McDonald's, and I knew exactly where it was. I'd walked past that McDonald's 100 times. It had been closed for years. Something about asbestos and health violations. The windows were boarded up. The parking lot had weeds growing through the cracks. The only reason I even noticed it was because of how out of place it looked, just sitting there on the edge of a newly gentrified neighborhood, like some forgotten relic. I stared at the screen, debating what to do next. I could just ignore it, close the browser, forget I ever saw it, move on with my life. Or I could go check it out. Guess which option I picked? I don't know what made me do it. Maybe it was boredom. Maybe it was some twisted sense of adventure. Or maybe, just maybe, it was something else. Something that wanted me to find it. The McDonald's was about a 15-minute walk from my apartment. I left around midnight, figuring the streets would be empty. They were. Even the 24-hour gas station on the corner had its lights dimmed, the cashier inside scrolling through his phone with dead eyes. As I got closer, the air felt wrong. You ever been somewhere that just feels off? Like your brain knows you're not supposed to be there? That was this place. The old McDonald's was rotting, graffiti covering every inch of its faded yellow walls, shattered glass from the drive-through window crunching under my shoes. The sign out front still had half a Happy Meal ad from 2016, the plastic peeling away like dead skin. I checked my phone. 12:27 a.m. The map had shown that the tunnel entrance was in the basement. But how the hell was I supposed to get inside? The front doors were chained shut, and every window was either boarded up or shattered beyond recognition. Then I noticed something. The back door, the one near the dumpster alley, was slightly open. Now, I know what you're thinking. That's a trap. Someone's in there waiting for you. But here's the thing. The lock was rusted solid. It hadn't been broken. It had just fallen apart. Like it had been waiting for someone to open it. Like it had been waiting for me. I pushed the door. It groaned, the hinges screaming, like something was alive inside the walls. The smell that hit me was disgusting. Rotting meat, mold, something else I couldn't place. Something wet. Inside, it was worse. The kitchen was still full of equipment, grills, deep fryers, even a few frozen patties sitting in an unplugged fridge covered in black slime. The floor was sticky. My shoes made a soft peeling sound with every step. Then I saw the footprints. Not old, dried ones. Fresh. They led from the door I had just entered, downstairs. I swallowed. My mouth was dry. I thought about turning back, but then I saw something that made my blood turn to ice. The footprints weren't made of dirt or dust. They were made of blood. I should have left. I should have turned around, gone home, pretended none of this ever happened. But I didn't, because something in my head whispered to me, "Go down." The basement door was wide open. The stairs were concrete, damp, covered in something that looked like handprints. I pulled out my phone and turned on the flashlight. As soon as I stepped onto the first stair, I swear to God I heard breathing. Not my own. Something slow, shallow, like someone was trying not to be heard. I held my breath, listened. The sound stopped. I kept going. The air got colder the further I went, like stepping inside a meat locker. My breath fogged. The walls changed from drywall to stone. That's when I realized this wasn't a McDonald's basement anymore. This was something else. The bottom of the stairs opened into a long, dark hallway. The walls were rough, ancient looking, and there were doors. Rusted metal doors lining both sides, some sealed shut, others barely hanging onto their hinges. I stepped forward. My flashlight flickered. Then I heard it. A click. Not just any click. A camera shutter. I spun around. Nothing. I was alone. Or at least, I thought I was. Because when I looked down at the floor, I saw something new. Another set of footprints. But these weren't going down the stairs. They were coming up. And they stopped right behind me. I ran. I don't even remember making the decision. I just ran. Down the hallway. Past the rusted doors. Past the smell of decay that was getting stronger. The hall twisted, turned, went deeper than it should have. The architecture changed. The stone walls turned to metal. The air filled with the faint hum of something electrical. Then the doors changed. At first, they were just rusted old security doors. But as I ran, they started looking different. Medical. Some of them had small windows. And that's when I made the worst mistake of my life. I looked inside. The first room was empty. Just a single hospital bed, its mattress stained black. The second had something piled in the corner, something wet. The third one? I wish I never saw it, because there was a man inside. Except he wasn't a man anymore. His body was stitched together, his arms way too long, his mouth sewn shut. His skin was pale, almost blue, like he had been frozen for years. Tubes ran into his veins, hooked up to some machine in the corner that was still running. And then, his eyes opened, not like a corpse suddenly twitching, not like a reflex. He looked at me. His pupils shrank, his breathing hitched. He was awake. My legs nearly gave out, but I forced myself to move. I sprinted down the hall, not even caring where I was going anymore. I could hear something behind me, shuffling, scraping, like nails dragging across metal. I saw an exit sign up ahead, a rusted metal ladder leading up. I didn't think, I just climbed. I reached the top, pushed open a hatch, and collapsed onto cold, wet pavement. I was outside, but not in the city, not even close. I was in the middle of a forest, somewhere far from home. The hatch slammed shut behind me. When I turned around, it was gone. Just wet leaves and dirt, like it had never been there at all. There are moments in life that don't feel real. Moments so incomprehensible, so violently ripped from the fabric of normalcy that your brain just refuses to accept them. I was standing in one of those moments. 1 second, I was crawling out of an underground nightmare beneath a fucking McDonald's. The next, I was in the middle of a dense, fog-covered forest that I had never seen before in my life. No streetlights, no distant hum of traffic, no buildings, just trees. Thick, rotting, endless trees. And the worst part, it was silent. Not just Oh, it's late at night. The woods are quiet. Silent. I mean the kind of absence that makes your ears ring. No crickets, no wind, no rustling branches, just the sound of my own breathing, and then a crunch, not from me, from behind me. I turned so fast I almost fell. My heart was pounding against my ribs, my throat tightening like it already knew I was about to scream. But there was nothing, just trees, just darkness, just a creeping, rotting feeling in my gut that I wasn't alone. My phone. I still had my phone. I pulled it out, my hand shaking, and pressed the power button. No service. Not surprising. But what was surprising was the time. 3:41 a.m. I had entered the McDonald's basement at 12:27 a.m. I had only been down there for 20 minutes. So how the fuck was it almost 4 in the morning? A thick knot of dread coiled in my stomach. The timeline didn't make sense. None of this made sense. And that's when I noticed something even worse. My battery was at 2%. I had left my apartment with a full charge. Before I could even process that, my phone screen glitched. Just for a second. A flicker of static. Then, a picture appeared. Not one I had taken. It was of me. Taken from behind. My throat closed. My entire body went rigid. I looked up. The trees were wrong. I don't know how else to describe it. They had always been tall, dark silhouettes against the fog, but now they seemed closer, tighter, like they had shifted when I wasn't looking. Another crunch. To my right, then my left, then right behind me. I ran. I don't even know which direction. I just ran. My lungs burned. My legs screamed. But I didn't stop. The trees blurred past me, the branches reaching like they were alive, the silence swallowing the sound of my footsteps. Then I heard it. A voice. Not a whisper. Not a distant call. It was right in my ear. "You shouldn't be here," I screamed. I didn't mean to. I couldn't help it. My body was shutting down, my brain unraveling, panic swallowing every single rational thought. Then, light. Up ahead, through the trees. Faint. Flickering. A gas station. The kind you only see on long, empty highways. Just a single, weathered building with a flickering neon sign and a single pump covered in grime. I ran toward it like my life depended on it, because I was sure it did. The moment I stepped into the fluorescent glow, I felt like I could breathe again. The silence of the forest was gone, replaced with the low hum of an old freezer and the buzz of flickering lights. The cashier barely looked up. A heavy-set guy in a dirty hoodie, scrolling through his phone behind the counter. I staggered inside, gasping for air. My clothes were soaked in sweat, my hands trembling so badly I could barely shove my phone into my pocket. I forced myself to speak. "Whoa, where am I?" The cashier finally glanced up. His face was blank. "You all right, man?" I swallowed hard. No, where is this? What town am I in?" He frowned, like I had asked him to solve a physics equation. "You serious?" I just stared at him. He rubbed the back of his neck, glancing towards the glass door like he was suddenly nervous. "This is Bellbrook." I felt a cold wave of wrongness wash over me. I had never heard of Bellbrook in my entire life, and that's when I saw the security camera monitor behind him. It was a cheap 4-panel setup, showing different angles of the gas station. One camera showed the forest, the one I had just come from, and something was standing at the tree line. It wasn't a person, it wasn't an animal, it was just tall, too tall. Its limbs were wrong, its posture unnatural, like it was waiting. Then, it tilted its head, not like a human, not like something that understands motion, like a puppet jerked by invisible strings. My entire body locked up. I couldn't speak. I couldn't move. Cashier followed my gaze. Then, the monitor went black. Static swallowed the screen. Then the lights in the store flickered. The air changed. Suddenly, it smelled like rotting meat. The cashier took a step back. His face was pale. "Shit." That was all he said. Just that single word. Then the front door unlocked. It didn't open. It unlocked. Click. Like an invitation. I turned to the cashier. "What the fuck is happening?" His eyes darted to the door, then back to me. His face was full of something I had never seen before. Something like terror. Then he reached under the counter and pulled out a shotgun. He tossed it to me. "Run." The lights went out, and outside, something started laughing. Not a person, not a voice. Something bigger. Something wrong. Something that had been following me since the tunnel. And now, it had found me again. The moment the lights died, the world collapsed into something else. You think you know what darkness is. You don't. This wasn't just the absence of light. This was something alive. A breathing, watching thing that seeped into my skin, into my head, like it was trying to find something inside me to pull apart. I stood frozen, shotgun clutched in both hands. Outside, something laughed. Not a human laugh. Not even close. It was mocking, stretched out, filled with these wet, clicking sounds, like someone gargling blood while trying to sound happy. The air grew heavy. The stink of rotting meat thickened. And then, something knocked. 3 times. Slow. Deliberate. Not on the glass door. On the window next to my head. I turned, barely breathing. At first, all I saw was my own reflection in the blackness of the glass. My own wide, terrified eyes staring back at me. Then my reflection blinked. But I hadn't. A hand pressed against the glass. Fingers too long, skin gray, nails split and jagged. Then, it smiled at me. My own face, grinning like a corpse puppet. Teeth too white, too sharp, stretching way too far. I screamed. The shotgun boomed, and the glass exploded outward. The sound was deafening, but I barely registered it. I was already turning, already running. The cashier was gone. I didn't know when he had disappeared, but I was alone now. And the door? The front door was wide open. The air outside pulsed. Something big moved beyond the trees, shifting just out of sight. A shape, tall and wrong. Too many joints, not enough bones. The laughter came again. Only now, it was inside the store. The aisles groaned. The shelves trembled. Products tumbled to the floor, rolling into the darkness. A whisper slid against my ear. "I like your face." I ran. I hit the pavement at full speed, legs screaming, lungs burning. The shotgun was heavy in my hands, but I refused to drop it. The gas station's neon sign flickered, glitching between open and something that almost spelled no hope. I didn't look back. The road stretched ahead, cracked and wrong, leading nowhere. I didn't know where I was running. I just knew I couldn't stop. Then, footsteps, heavy, wet, and too many. Something was following me. No, not something. Multiple somethings. Shuffling, dragging. A chorus of clicking, snapping joints, moving just outside the edges of my vision. Then, a voice. But not one voice. Hundreds. Whispering, laughing, crying. "Give it back." I ran faster. The road started to change. The pavement was soft now. Mushy. Like I was running across old flesh. The lines on the road twisted, curling into words that I couldn't read, shifting when I blinked. And then I saw it. Up ahead. A house. Standing alone in the middle of this nowhere place, surrounded by nothing. The windows were lit. A faint, warm glow spilling onto the broken road like an invitation. I didn't care if it was a trap. I ran toward it like my life depended on it. Because it did. The door wasn't locked. It swung open before I could even touch it, and I stumbled inside, my legs nearly giving out beneath me. The second I crossed the threshold, the noises stopped. The whispers, the footsteps, the laughter, everything. I turned and slammed the door shut. My breath came in ragged gasps. My whole body was shaking, sweat pouring down my back. Then I looked around. The house was normal. A living room, a staircase, a kitchen in the back, a couch, a TV, a coffee table with a stack of old magazines. It looked like it had been lived in, but it wasn't dusty. It wasn't abandoned. It was waiting. And that's when I noticed the family photos on the walls. I took a slow step forward, my stomach twisting. There were 4 of them, a father, a mother, 2 kids, smiling, happy. But as I walked past them, the images changed. The eyes went first. In the first frame, the mother's pupils had shrunk to pinpricks. In the second, the father's eyes were missing entirely, just black pits swallowing his face. In the third, the kids' mouths had stretched into grins too wide for their faces, revealing rows and rows of needle-thin teeth. The fourth, there was no one left in it, just a house, this house, and in one of the upstairs windows, a silhouette watching me. I didn't want to go upstairs, but my feet moved anyway. The shotgun felt useless now, heavy, fake, like it wasn't even real. The staircase groaned beneath me. The air changed with every step. By the time I reached the top, the walls weren't walls anymore. They were breathing. The wallpaper pulsed, damp and alive. Veins of black mold spreading like spiderwebs. The floor was wet, soaking through my shoes with something thick and warm. A single door stood at the end of the hallway, slightly open. Something waited inside. I didn't want to see it, but I had to. I stepped forward, and the door swung open. There was a mirror inside, an old, dusty vanity with a cracked glass surface. And in the mirror, I saw myself. At least I thought it was me, until it smiled. My reflection lifted its hand, even though I didn't move. It waved at me. Then it spoke. "You're wearing it wrong." The room collapsed around me. The walls melted. The floor disappeared. And suddenly, I was falling. I woke up screaming. Not the kind of scream that comes from a bad dream. The kind that comes from something real. The kind that shreds your throat raw because your body is convinced you're dying. But when my eyes snapped open, I wasn't in that house anymore. I wasn't even in the forest anymore. I was somewhere worse. At first, I thought I was blind. Everything was black, cold, damp. The air smelled thick with iron and something rotting. Then, faintly, I heard dripping, slow, hollow. I reached out, fingers skimming concrete. A wall. I wasn't outside. I was back underground. No. My stomach clenched. My throat closed. I didn't remember falling asleep. I didn't remember falling at all. I'd been in that house, staring at my own reflection, and then the mirror. I touched my face. It felt wrong, like my skin was too loose, like it wasn't mine. My fingers trembled over my cheek, down to my chin. My mouth was dry. Then I heard it, a voice, right behind me. "Don't turn around." I froze. My whole body locked up so violently that I thought my spine might snap. The voice wasn't normal. It was too close, too familiar. And then it spoke again. "If you turn around, you'll see what you really look like." My breath hitched. My fingers dug into the wall. I didn't move, couldn't move, because somehow I knew if I turned around, it would kill me. Or worse, it would take me. A long silence stretched between us. Then A hand touched my shoulder. I ran. The tunnel stretched forever. The ceiling was low, the walls wet, something alive slithering between the cracks in the stone. The air was thick, pressing in on me like it was trying to swallow me. But I didn't stop. I couldn't, because whatever was behind me wasn't running. It didn't have to. It was waiting for me to get tired, for me to slow down, and the moment I did, it would catch me. So I ran. I ran until my lungs felt like they were filled with knives, until my legs shook, until my vision blurred. Then, up ahead, a door, rusty, heavy. I slammed into it, grabbing at the handle with slick, bloodied fingers I didn't remember hurting. The door wouldn't open. I yanked. Something laughed behind me, a soft, clicking gurgle, like bones scraping together inside a wet, rotten throat. I threw myself against the door. It wouldn't budge. Then I heard it, a whisper, inside my head. "You've been here before," I screamed. My hand slipped lower, grabbing at something embedded in the door. A keypad. I barely registered what I was doing. My fingers moved on their own, punching in a random code. A beep. Then, the door swung open. I stumbled through, crashing to the floor. The door slammed shut behind me. I gasped for air, my whole body shaking. My skin was clammy, my limbs numb. Then I looked up, and I realized where I was. My apartment. At first, nothing made sense. The living room was exactly the same. My coffee table, my couch, my TV, my shoes by the door, just where I had left them. It was identical, but it wasn't right. The air was still, the kind of stillness that comes when a room hasn't been lived in for years. I got to my feet. My legs screamed in protest. Then I saw my laptop, open on the coffee table. A document was on the screen, and it was already typed out. My heart stopped, because I recognized the text. It was my story. Everything. Every single word I had written. Every single detail. And then I saw the last line. "You are not you." A shadow moved in the reflection of my laptop screen. I turned. The hallway was dark, but something was standing there, tall, motionless, a perfect silhouette of me, watching, waiting. Then, it stepped forward. The light hit its face, and my stomach turned inside out. It was me, but not right. Its skin was stretched too tight. Its eyes were too wide. Its smile was wrong, like it had learned how to mimic human expressions, but didn't understand what they meant. It tilted its head. "Why are you wearing my face?" I opened my mouth. No sound came out. The thing stepped closer. Its neck twitched, like it wasn't used to moving in a human body. I stumbled back, my legs collapsing under me. Then, it raised its hand, and I realized something. It was holding a knife, a long, thin scalpel. It stepped closer, slow, patient, like it had done this before. "You don't belong here." The words weren't human. The voice was too many voices, layered on top of each other, like a chorus of dead things speaking at once. It took another step, then another. I pressed myself against the couch, my vision blurring. This wasn't real. This couldn't be real. Then, it lunged. The scalpel flashed, and everything went black. I don't remember what happened after that. I don't remember escaping. All I remember is waking up, outside, in the alley behind the McDonald's, like nothing had ever happened, like I had never gone underground. But when I touched my face, my skin hurt, and when I looked at my reflection in a nearby car window, there were stitches along my jawline, like someone had put me back together. I don't know what's real anymore. I don't know if I ever left that tunnel. All I know is this: I haven't been feeling like myself lately, and sometimes when I pass by a mirror, I see my reflection smiling at me, even when I'm not. I was hired as a waiter for an elite Hollywood event. The guests weren't eating food, they were drinking from IV bags. I've worked a lot of weird gigs in my life. Bartender, security guard, even a private driver for a minor celebrity who turned out to be way more insane than his public persona let on. But nothing, and I mean nothing, could have prepared me for what I saw at this one event. It all started with a Craigslist ad. Yeah, I know. Rookie mistake. But rent in LA isn't cheap, and I was desperate for cash. The listing was vague. Luxury event in Beverly Hills, seeking discreet, professional staff. One night only. $1,200. Cash. Now, I've worked some high-end parties before. Usually, it's just a bunch of influencers posing with overpriced champagne for their Instagram stories. I figured this would be the same. Serve some drinks, listen to rich people complain, go home with a fat stack of cash. Simple. I replied to the ad and got a response within minutes. A guy named Mr. Locke told me to meet at an upscale hotel lobby in downtown LA for a briefing. No phone call, no interview, just an address and a time. That should have been my first red flag. The briefing. When I arrived at the hotel, I was expecting some sort of orientation or a group of other staff members. Instead, I was met by two men in black suits standing by the entrance, both wearing these tiny earpieces like they were Secret Service. One of them, this guy with slicked back gray hair and these creepy two white teeth, walked up to me, smiled, and said, "Mr. Locke will see you now." He led me to a private suite on the top floor. The room smelled like expensive cologne and something else, something I couldn't quite place at the time. Inside, sitting at this massive glass table, was Mr. Locke. Tall, thin, pale as hell, the kind of guy whose age was impossible to guess. He could have been 40, or he could have been 70, with some really good plastic surgery. He didn't shake my hand, didn't introduce himself. He just slid a piece of paper toward me and said, "Sign this. Standard NDA now." NDAs aren't unusual for high-profile gigs, but this one was different. It wasn't just a promise to keep things confidential. It had all this weird legal jargon about waiving liability and agreeing to strict compliance with event customs. I hesitated. Mr. Locke just smiled. "You'll be well compensated. Just follow the rules." I should have walked out right then, but $1,200 for one night. I signed. The mansion. The event was being held at a private estate in Beverly Hills. I got picked up in a black SUV with tinted windows. There were no other staff members in the car, just me and the driver, who didn't say a single word the entire ride. When we pulled up to the mansion, I felt it instantly. Something was off. It wasn't just the size of the place. It was massive, bigger than any mansion I'd ever seen. It was the people. Even before I stepped out of the car, I could see them through the floor-to-ceiling windows. Tall, elegant figures, dressed in all black. No loud music, no drunken laughter, just this eerie, low hum of voices. I was led through a back entrance and given a uniform, an all-black suit, tailored exactly to my size. I don't remember telling them my measurements. The other staff members were already in the kitchen, standing in a perfectly straight line. Nobody was talking, just staring straight ahead, hands clasped in front of them, like they were trained for this. That's when I noticed something weird. There was no food, no trays of hors d'oeuvres, no chefs plating fancy entrees. Just rows of IV bags, clear liquid, some with a faint red tint. I thought, maybe it's some kind of weird Hollywood cleanse thing. Rich people are into all sorts of freaky diet trends, but something about those IV bags felt wrong. Then, as if on cue, the doors to the dining hall swung open, and the guests began to arrive. When the doors to the dining hall swung open, I expected the usual Hollywood elite, the Botoxed actresses, billionaire CEOs, and sleazy producers in designer suits. But the people who walked in were not normal. They moved too smoothly, like they were gliding instead of walking. Their faces were gaunt, stretched too tight over their skulls, and their eyes were completely black, not just dark, pitch black, no whites, no irises, nothing. And the way they looked at us, the staff, wasn't like how rich people usually ignore service workers. No, this was different. They looked at us like we were cattle. I was standing near the back of the room, gripping the silver tray they had given me, trying to stay calm, but every part of me was screaming that I shouldn't be there. Then, Mr. Locke walked in. The room fell silent as he took his place at the long, glossy dining table. He smiled, that too white grin stretching across his face, and raised his hand. Let the feast begin. That's when the IV bags were wheeled out. They weren't filled with clear liquid anymore. They were filled with blood. At first, I thought it was some twisted Hollywood health trend, maybe some kind of weird rich person plasma therapy. But then I saw the names on the bags, handwritten in black marker, names of real people. Some had first and last names. Some had ages. One bag, almost empty, said Michael R., 6 years old. I felt my stomach drop. My hands went clammy, but no one else reacted. The other waiters just stood there, frozen, staring straight ahead like they were trained to ignore it. The guests reached for the IV bags, unhooking them from the stands like they'd done this 1,000 times before. They inserted long silver needles into their wrists, pushing the tubes into their veins. And then they started drinking, not from their mouths, from their veins. I watched as the dark red liquid flowed into their arms, their skin twitching and tightening, their veins pulsing violently, as if something was crawling underneath. Some of them sighed in relief, like they had been starving for weeks and were finally tasting food again. One woman let out this low, shuddering moan, her head rolling back as the blood entered her system. Her skin went from pale and sickly to smooth, glowing, almost inhumanly perfect. It was like watching a corpse come back to life. I wanted to run. Every fiber of my being was screaming at me to get the hell out of there. But then one of the guests turned and looked directly at me. His fourth bag was still half full. He was young, maybe early 30s, but his face was wrong. His cheekbones were too sharp, his jaw too angular, and his eyes, those black, endless pits, locked onto mine with unnatural intensity. He licked his lips, smiled, and said, "You're new. The entertainment." I forced myself to nod, gripping the tray so tightly my knuckles turned white. I kept my face neutral, trying to blend in, but inside, I was losing my mind. That's when the lights dimmed and Mr. Locke stood up. For tonight's entertainment, a fresh selection. A door at the side of the room slid open, and two masked men in black uniforms stepped out, dragging something behind them. Not something. Someone. There were 4 of them, men and women, dressed in tattered clothes, their wrists and ankles shackled. Their eyes were wild with terror, darting around the room like they were searching for a way out. One of them, a girl, couldn't have been older than 18, begged, "Please, Please, I don't know why I'm here. Please, just let us go. I'll do anything. Just please." A woman at the table laughed, this delicate, elegant little laugh, like she had just heard an amusing joke. Then Mr. Locke said something I will never forget. "If you want to leave, earn your freedom. Take from the weak. Show us you belong." The girl's face crumpled in confusion. That's when one of the other captives, a man in his 40s, lunged at her. Not to protect her, to kill her. It happened so fast, I barely processed it. 1 second, he was standing there, trembling. The next, he had her on the ground, hands around her throat, strangling her, while she thrashed and kicked. She tried to scream, but no sound came out. The guests watched in silence, their black eyes gleaming, enjoying it. The girl's struggles slowed. Her hands clawed weakly at his arms. Then, they went limp. Dead. Mr. Locke smiled and gestured to the remaining 3 captives. "You have 30 seconds. Decide." And then, they tore each other apart. No hesitation this time. The second the words left his mouth, they attacked, biting, clawing, screaming. I had never seen so much blood in my life. One man grabbed a woman by the hair and slammed her face into the marble floor until her skull caved in. Another took a silver fork from the table and stabbed it into someone's eye, twisting until they stopped moving. It was animalistic. The last survivor, a young man, maybe mid-20s, stood there soaked in blood, panting. Mr. Locke gave him a slow clap. "Welcome to the new world." A masked servant approached and handed him an IV bag, labeled with the name of the woman he had just butchered. I watched, frozen in horror, as he took the needle and slid it into his arm. He didn't even hesitate. The moment the blood entered his veins, his posture changed. His breathing slowed. The terror in his eyes faded, replaced by something else. Hunger. Then, for the first time, Mr. Locke turned to us, the staff. "Now, let's see who among you is truly worthy." I stood there, paralyzed, my heart slamming against my ribs so hard I thought it would explode. The dining hall reeked of iron and death, a thick, suffocating stench of warm blood pooling across the polished marble floor. The man who had just murdered his way to survival stood trembling, veins dark and swollen from the IV bag that was still hooked into his arm. His body twitched unnaturally, like something inside of him was rewiring, forcing him to adapt to whatever poison he had just absorbed. And Mr. Locke, he just smiled. "Now, let's see who among you is truly worthy." The room went silent. The other waitstaff, the ones who had been standing motionless all night, stared ahead, expressionless, empty. But me, I wasn't trained for this. I wasn't brainwashed into obedience like them. I was shaking. I knew exactly what was coming next. Mr. Locke turned toward us, gesturing lazily with one hand. The 2 masked enforcers, still slick with blood, moved toward our line of servers, grabbing 2 at random. A young woman, probably no older than 22, and a guy who looked just as terrified as me. They were dragged to the center of the room, shoved to their knees next to the mutilated corpses of the previous contestants. Blood was seeping into their uniforms, soaking into the pristine black fabric. The girl tried to scream. One of the enforcers clamped a hand over her mouth. "We've fed well tonight," Mr. Locke said, leaning forward. "But power is not merely taken, it is earned." He turned his empty, abyss-like eyes to the remaining waitstaff. "You will prove your loyalty, or you will be discarded." Then a third masked enforcer stepped forward, holding 2 objects, a knife and a small silver spoon. I felt my stomach turn. The enforcer set them down between the two captives. The polished steel gleamed under the chandelier light. "One will live," Mr. Locke continued, folding his hands beneath his chin. "One will not, and the choice is yours." The two waiters looked at each other, then at us, pleading. The girl shook her head frantically, muffled sobs escaping behind the enforcer's gloved hand. The guy was hyperventilating, his eyes darting around the room, desperate for an escape that did not exist. Nobody moved. The other waitstaff, lifeless mannequins, standing perfectly still. I knew deep down, that if I hesitated, I'd be next. I took a step forward. Mr. Locke's gaze landed on me. "Ah," he smiled. "Our newcomer. How delightful." The enforcer removed his hand from the girl's mouth, and she immediately screamed. Please don't do this. I don't." Silence. Mr. Locke's voice wasn't loud, but the second he spoke, the girl choked on her words, as if they had been ripped out of her throat. Something was happening to her. Her limbs locked up, like an invisible force was constraining her. Her breathing became shallow and ragged. Her veins darkened, spreading like black ink beneath her skin. "She's already fading," Mr. Locke said, watching me with an almost amused expression. "You must decide. Now." I looked down at the weapons. A knife, a spoon. And in that moment, I realized exactly what they wanted me to do. They didn't want me to kill. They wanted me to carve. I reached for the spoon. Mr. Locke grinned. I turned towards the girl, who was now barely able to keep herself upright. Her lips were turning blue, her breath shallow, her eyes rolled back, her pupils shrinking to pinpricks. She was dying, and I hadn't even touched her. I crouched beside her, gripping the cold handle of the spoon so tightly my fingers ached. "I'm sorry," I whispered. "I wish I could tell you that I hesitated, that I fought back, that I tried to escape, but I didn't, because in that moment I understood. She was already gone. Something had drained her. Something inside this place had reduced her to a husk, a shell, and if I didn't act, I would be next." I forced myself to raise the spoon. She didn't even scream, not when I dug the metal into her eye socket, not when I felt the wet pop as the pressure gave way, not even when I pulled it free, dark blood spilling hot and thick down her cheek. Her body twitched violently, spasming, and then she stopped moving. The guests sighed in satisfaction. A slow, rhythmic applause filled the room. I felt numb, like my soul had been ripped out of me. My breathing was heavy, my hands shaking as I let the spoon clatter to the floor, slick with warm blood. Mr. Locke stood, adjusting the gold cufflinks on his immaculate suit. "Well done." A masked enforcer lifted the lifeless body of the girl and carried her away, disappearing through a hidden door at the back of the dining hall. The man, the one who had been spared, was handed an IV bag. He took it, without hesitation, and as the dark liquid entered his veins, I watched his expression change. The fear left his face, replaced by something else. Something hungry. Mr. Locke turned his attention back to me. "It seems we have a promising recruit." I didn't speak. Couldn't speak. He stepped closer, placing a hand on my shoulder. I flinched. His grip was ice cold. "Tell me," he murmured, his lips inches from my ear. "How does it feel to be chosen?" I didn't answer, because deep down, I knew. I had just taken my first step into their world, and there was no way out. I wasn't the same person when I stood up. Something had shifted inside me. I could still feel the warmth of her blood on my fingers, the sticky wetness seeping under my nails. Her last breath had been ragged, empty, but the sound echoed in my head like a song I'd never forget. The girl was gone because of me, and yet I was still alive. Mr. Locke's grip lingered on my shoulder for a moment before he stepped back, his expression unreadable. The guests watched silently, their obsidian eyes locked onto me, unblinking, unhuman. I could feel them inside my head. They were testing me, waiting to see if I would break. "The feast is nearly complete," Mr. Locke announced, his voice smooth and composed. "But there is one final step before we welcome our newest member." The masked enforcers reappeared, carrying something heavy between them. A body. No, not a body. It was the girl, or rather, what was left of her. Her skin had already begun to pale and shrivel, but the hole where her eye had been was still wet and fresh, a dark red river trickling down her cheek. Her mouth hung open, frozen mid-scream. The guests leaned forward in anticipation. I wanted to scream, to run, to claw at my own skin and tear myself out of this nightmare. But I couldn't. I didn't move, because deep down, I knew this wasn't over. An enforcer set down a silver platter beside the body. At first, I thought it was empty, but then I saw it, a scalpel and a bowl. My stomach twisted. I knew what they wanted. Mr. Locke's smile widened. "Consume." A sound rose in the room, a low, inhuman whispering. It wasn't coming from the guests. It was coming from inside my own head. "Eat, eat, eat." I swallowed hard, the taste of bile burning my throat. My own breath felt too loud, too sharp. I could feel the weight of every gaze pressing into me, waiting, expectant. And then I moved. I don't know why. Maybe it was fear. Maybe it was something worse. Maybe a part of me had already belonged to them. I picked up the scalpel. It was small, delicate, but I could feel the sharpness even through the latex gloves they had given me. I crouched beside the body. My body. My kill. She smelled like copper and decay. I tried not to think about it. I tried to imagine I was cutting into a piece of steak, not a girl who had begged me for mercy. I pressed the scalpel into her thigh. The skin parted too easily, like slicing into overripe fruit. A thin, wet layer of fat glistened beneath the surface, and my stomach lurched. The whispering grew louder. "Eat, eat, eat." I kept going. I cut deep, through muscle, through tendon. By the time I had carved a clean, bloodied strip from her flesh, my hands were soaked. The warm fluid ran down my wrists, dripping onto the marble floor in thick crimson beads. I turned to Mr. Locke. He nodded. I lifted the piece of her to my mouth. I hesitated. Then I took a bite. The taste. It wasn't what I expected. It wasn't like beef or pork or anything I could compare it to. It was sweeter, richer. The texture was firm but delicate, and the juices spread across my tongue in a way that felt almost euphoric. I swallowed, and suddenly I wasn't in the room anymore. The visions, I saw a city made of bone. The sky was black and empty, not a single star, just endless, consuming darkness stretching beyond eternity. Towers, white, jagged spires of pure bone, rose from the ground like the ribcage of some dead, ancient god. And then I saw them, the ones who had come before me. They stood along the streets, watching. Their faces were hollow, skin stretched too tight over their skulls, their mouths stitched shut with blackened thread. But their eyes, their black, empty eyes, I knew them. I knew them like I knew myself, because they had all done what I had just done. They had eaten. They had become. The whispering turned into laughter. a horrible, wet laughter that rattled through my skull, a noise that wasn't coming from the city, or the sky, or the figures watching me. It was coming from inside me. Then, in an instant, I was back. The room snapped into focus. The guests were smiling. Mr. Locke clapped his hands together, and the sound was deafening. "Welcome," he said. "You are now one of us." I felt different. Something inside me had shifted. I was still me, still in my own body, but I wasn't alone. Something else was there now. Something watching, waiting, and I knew, without a doubt, that I would never leave this place the same. I wasn't just a waiter anymore. I was a participant, a recruit, a chosen one. And the hunger had only just begun. Something inside me had changed. I could feel it in my skin, under my nails, in the slow, rhythmic pulse of my heart. The meat I had swallowed sat warm and heavy in my stomach, but it didn't make me feel sick. It didn't make me gag or recoil in disgust. I felt alive. The world around me was sharper. The soft murmur of the guests' voices now sounded inhumanly crisp, like I could hear their words before they even spoke them. The candlelight flickering off the long black marble table seemed to pulse in time with my own heartbeat. And the smell, that overwhelming coppery, sweet perfume of blood and decay. It didn't disgust me anymore. It called to me. Across the room, Mr. Locke was still smiling, his hollow black eyes gleaming with something beyond amusement. Satisfaction. "Our newest initiate," he said, lifting a delicate crystal glass filled with dark, viscous liquid. "A toast." The other guests followed suit, raising their own glasses in silent unison, watching me, waiting. I was supposed to drink. I didn't even hesitate. I picked up the glass in front of me. It was cold, beaded with condensation, but the liquid inside was warm. I lifted it to my lips and took a slow, deliberate sip. The taste was thicker than wine, richer than blood. It was something else, something ancient. The moment it touched my tongue, I saw them again. The others, the ones before me. They stood in perfect rows, stretching into the black horizon. Each of them had once been where I was now. Each of them had been chosen. And now, they belonged to something else. Their skin was pale and stretched too tight. Their bodies longer, thinner than they should have been. Their fingers ended in sharp, bone-white points. They had no mouths, just eyes, wide, unblinking, endless black voids. I tried to move. I couldn't. I wasn't in control anymore. The whispering returned, low and wet, crawling through my skull like an infection. "You are one of us now. There is no escape." The shadows behind the figures began to move. They twisted and writhed like something alive, breathing, watching, something hungry. I felt my own body tremble, not in fear, but in understanding. This wasn't just a ritual. This wasn't just a cult. This was a contract. And the moment I had taken that first bite, I had signed my name. I was theirs now. The nightmare returns. When I snapped back to reality, I was still standing at the table, still holding the now empty glass. My pulse was slow, heavy. The guests were still watching me. Mr. Locke stepped closer. "How do you feel?" I opened my mouth, paused. I was going to say I felt sick, that I was horrified, that I wanted to run and never look back, but that wasn't the truth. "I feel..." The words came from my lips before I could stop them. "Hungry." The guests laughed, not polite chuckles, not murmured amusement. A deep, guttural laughter that didn't sound human. Mr. Locke nodded. "Then let us feed you properly." The masked enforcers dragged in another body. This one wasn't dead yet. A man, mid-30s, shirt ripped open, his chest rising and falling in rapid, panicked breaths, his arms and legs bound with thick iron shackles, his eyes darted wildly from guest to guest, then to me. I watched the terror bloom behind them. I knew that feeling. I had felt it less than an hour ago. "A gift," Mr. Locke murmured, voice smooth as silk. "For our newest member." The masked enforcer handed me a knife. I stared at it. I could hear his pulse. Fast, erratic, screaming beneath his skin. A week ago, I would have vomited at the thought of this. Now, I was just waiting for permission. Mr. Locke leaned in, whispering one final command. "Eat." And I did. Aftermath. That was the first night. The first time I tasted human flesh. Willingly. The first time I let the hunger control me. The first time I felt the power. I thought it would be difficult. I thought I would feel guilt, horror, regret. But I didn't. Because the hunger is louder than anything else. It drowns out the fear, the shame, the humanity. And once you let it in, it never lets you go. I left that mansion before sunrise. The next morning, I woke up in my apartment. No sign of what had happened. No blood, no knife, no proof. But the hunger was still there. It hasn't left me since. And I know it never will. Because now, when I walk down the street, past crowds of living, breathing people, I don't see strangers anymore. I see food. And worst of all, I don't want to stop. They promised me the hunger would never end. They were right. I paid for access to a dark web forum where doctors discuss medical testing that shouldn't exist. One of the cases had my DNA. I used to think the worst thing you could find on the dark web was hitmen, drugs, or human trafficking. I thought I'd seen everything. Scams, fake passports, stolen credit card dumps. Just another digital underworld where desperate people trade in things they shouldn't. I was so wrong. What I found wasn't just illegal. It wasn't just horrifying. It was something that shouldn't exist. Something that still keeps me awake at night, staring at the ceiling, feeling like I'm being watched. I'm telling this now because I don't think I have much time left. And if I disappear after posting this, don't look for me. I work in cybersecurity. My job is to research deep web marketplaces, flag illegal transactions, and track cybercriminal activity. Most of the time, it's boring. A lot of drug deals, credit card fraud, identity theft. Occasionally, I stumble across something worse. Black market organs, snuff film rumors, cryptic websites selling untraceable disappearances. But a few months ago, I got an anonymous email that changed everything. It was just a single line. "You've been selected for the autopsy room. Reply to proceed." No sender, no IP address, no explanation. Most of the time, I ignore these things. But this one was different. I shouldn't have replied, but I did. A few hours later, another email came in, an .onion link, which can only be accessed through the Tor browser, along with a single-use login key. A note underneath read, "Your credentials are non-transferable. Do not share." At this point, I should have walked away, but my curiosity got the best of me. I launched Tor, ran my VPN through a remote server in Singapore, and clicked the link. The site loaded instantly. That was the first red flag. Dark websites are usually slow because of the layers of encryption they go through. This one loaded like a regular web page, like it wasn't underground at all. A simple black screen appeared with the words, "Welcome to the autopsy room." Underneath, a single login box. I entered the credentials. A loading screen flashed for half a second before dumping me into the forum. At first glance, it looked like an old-school message board. Nothing fancy, just thread titles and usernames. But the threads, they weren't normal. Here are just a few that I saw. Study number 47, Prolonged Consciousness During Live Dissection. Patient X, a detailed look at organ removal without anesthesia. The pain threshold experiment. At what point does the human body give up? Each thread had hundreds of replies. Some of them were tagged with attachments. I clicked one at random. Inside was a case study, complete with time-stamped observations. The subject, a real person, was unregistered, meaning no official identity. The experiment? To see how long they could be kept alive while their body was systematically dismantled. Hour 1, removal of left hand. Hour 2, removal of right foot. Hour 3, subject is in severe distress but conscious. Hour 4, lungs are collapsed to simulate asphyxiation. Hour 5, subject is still showing signs of brain activity. At the bottom was a video file. I shouldn't have clicked it. God help me, I shouldn't have clicked it. A grainy black and white screen flickered to life. A person strapped to a surgical table, their chest rising and falling rapidly, their eyes wide, darting around the room in terror. The camera was positioned above them, looking down. A doctor, face covered by a surgical mask, stood over them with a scalpel. The person on the table tried to scream, but their mouth was sewn shut. The doctor slowly inserted the scalpel between their ribs. Not fast, not in a single motion. Slowly, the person convulsed. Their eyes bulged. Their body bucked against the restraints. The doctor twisted the scalpel. A muffled, gurgling noise came from the patient's throat. Their fingers flexed, clenched, then released. And then the doctor pulled something out. A rib. The video cut off. I slammed my laptop shut. My hands were shaking. This wasn't fake. This wasn't a horror movie. This was real. I forced myself to take deep breaths. I had to get off this site. I moved my cursor to log out. Then I saw something that made my blood turn to ice. At the top of the forum was a user panel. Logged in members. Most of the usernames were random medical aliases, but one caught my eye. Welcome, D. Carter. That's my name. I hadn't entered it anywhere. I yanked my internet cable out of the wall, shut my laptop, turned off my phone. I sat there, in the dark, my pulse pounding in my ears. How did they know my name? How did they know I was watching? That night, I barely slept. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that video. The person gasping through sewn lips, the rib being pulled from their body while they were still alive. I told myself I wouldn't go back, but the next morning, another email arrived. No subject, no body, just a link. I knew what it was before I even clicked. Another thread, but this one wasn't a case study. It was a patient profile, and at the top, in bold letters, was my full legal name. Subject number 86, D. Carter, age 27, blood type, O+ genetic markers, high compatibility, status, pre-approved. I stared at the screen, heart hammering. I scrolled down. There was another video attachment. The thumbnail was a hospital bed, with someone already lying in it. Their face was covered by a surgical mask, but their body, their hands, their hair. It was me. I don't remember how long I sat there, staring at my screen, my own name, my own medical file, the video thumbnail, someone lying in a hospital bed who looked exactly like me. My chest felt tight. My skin was cold. There were only two possibilities. 1. This was an elaborate threat, someone trying to scare me because I had stumbled onto something I wasn't supposed to see. 2. This was real, and if it was real, then I was already marked. My stomach clenched, a deep, sick feeling spreading through my gut. I knew I should delete the email, destroy my laptop, wipe everything, but instead, I clicked the video. A grainy, low-resolution feed popped up. The same hospital bed from the thumbnail. The camera was positioned high up in the corner of the room, almost like a security feed. The walls were bare, sterile, grey. Bright overhead lights cast long shadows across the floor. The figure in the bed was motionless, strapped down. I leaned in closer. The body, my body, was dressed in a thin hospital gown, arms fastened to the sides of the bed with thick leather straps. The face was covered, not with a surgical mask, but with a tight, flesh-colored wrap that clung to the skin, smoothing out every detail until the head looked featureless. I swallowed hard. A soft, rhythmic beeping filled the audio. Heart monitor. Whoever this was, they were still alive. Then, movement. A shadow at the edge of the frame. Someone in a white coat stepped into view. A doctor. But something was wrong. The coat was too clean, stiff, like it had never been worn before. Their hands, covered in black surgical gloves, were perfectly still. The way they moved, it wasn't natural, precise, deliberate, inhuman. I felt my breathing go shallow. The doctor reached down. With slow, careful movements, they peeled back the wrap from the patient's face. I recoiled. The skin underneath was smooth, pale, like a wax model. There were no eyelids, no lips, just holes where the mouth and nose should be. And then, the eyes. They were open, wide, unblinking, perfectly round. The irises were dark, almost black, the pupils blown out like someone in a state of absolute terror. The thing on the table wasn't me, but it looked like me, a perfect, skinless imitation. I wanted to look away, but I couldn't. My whole body felt frozen, locked in place by something deeper than fear, something primal. The doctor moved again. They lifted something from a metal tray beside the bed, a long, thin scalpel. I clenched my jaw. I knew what was coming. They pressed the blade against the imitation's chest. The body convulsed. The exposed skin twitched. The mouth hole gaped open in a silent scream. No sound, no resistance. The doctor cut deep. A long vertical incision, slow and deliberate. The flesh peeled apart effortlessly, revealing a glimpse of something inside. Not muscle, not blood. Something else. I paused the video. I felt like I was going to vomit. My fingers hovered over the trackpad, shaking. I couldn't keep watching. And then, my laptop screen glitched. The video unpaused itself. I sucked in a sharp breath. The doctor's hand reached inside the chest cavity. For a few seconds, they felt around, searching. Then their fingers gripped something. They pulled, and I saw it. A thin, white cord. It stretched from deep inside the chest, connected to something deeper. The doctor tugged harder. The patient's body twitched violently. And then, the cord snapped. The moment it disconnected, the imitation went limp. The doctor stepped back, holding the severed thread between two fingers. Then, for the first time, they looked up, looked directly into the camera. A sudden rush of static filled the audio. My laptop screen flickered, and then the video cut to black. I slammed my laptop shut. My hands were damp with sweat. My entire body felt wrong, like something was creeping under my skin, sinking into my bones. I needed to get out. I needed to move. I grabbed my phone. I was halfway through dialing 911 when I noticed something. A notification. A new email. I stared at it, my pulse pounding in my ears. The subject line was blank. I hesitated, then clicked. Only one sentence was inside. Running won't help, D. Carter. Your procedure is already scheduled. I dropped my phone. My mind was racing. What the hell was this? Who were these people? What did they mean? Scheduled. And then, something even worse. The timestamp on the email. It had been sent an hour ago, before I even watched the video, before I even saw the imitation, before I even knew what was coming. Someone had known exactly what I was going to do, and that meant they were watching me. My hands wouldn't stop shaking. My heartbeat was pounding in my skull, loud enough that I could barely hear anything else. I tried to take a breath, but it felt like something thick and heavy was pressing against my chest. The email, the timestamp. They had sent it before I even watched the video. They knew. They knew everything. I don't remember standing up. I don't remember grabbing my car keys. I just remember the desperate, overwhelming feeling that I had to get out. Now I left my apartment in seconds. No packing, no planning, just a mindless rush to my car, heart hammering so hard it felt like my ribs might crack. The parking lot was silent, too silent. The moment I stepped outside, I felt it, a presence, like something was watching me, studying me. The air was thick, suffocating, like the moment before a lightning strike. I forced myself to walk faster. I was almost to my car when I saw it. A black sedan parked across the street, unmarked, tinted windows, engine running, no plates. I froze. A beat of silence passed, and then the driver's door opened. I didn't wait to see who stepped out. I ran. I yanked open my car door, threw myself inside, and locked it. My fingers were shaking so badly I could barely get the key into the ignition. The engine roared to life. In my rearview mirror, I saw them. A man in a white coat was standing beside the black sedan. No emotion, no movement, just standing there, head tilted slightly, watching me. His eyes, they were too wide, too focused, like he was memorizing me. I didn't wait. I peeled out of the parking lot, tires screeching, heart slamming against my ribs. I didn't look back. I just drove. For hours, I kept checking my mirrors, waiting for headlights to appear, waiting for someone to follow me. Nothing. By the time I reached the outskirts of town, the sky was already dark. I pulled into an empty gas station and sat there, hands clutching the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles were white. I tried to breathe, tried to think. What the hell was happening? Who were these people? And why? Why did they have my DNA? I needed answers. I reached for my phone, opened my email, and there it was. Another message. No subject line, no sender info, just a single link. My stomach twisted. I should have deleted it, but I didn't. I clicked, and the moment the page loaded, I knew I had made a mistake. The case file. It wasn't a forum post this time. It was a document, a medical report, and at the top, my name. Subject number 86, D. Carter, age 27, blood type, O+ genetic markers, high compatibility, status, pre-approved, scheduled for extraction. I felt my pulse in my throat. I scrolled down, swallowing the bile rising in my stomach. There were pages of information, scans, test results, lab notes, and then photos of me, walking to work, sitting at a Starbucks, sleeping in my apartment. These weren't old, these were recent. I clicked on one. The timestamp was yesterday. Someone had been watching me, following me, for months. I kept scrolling, fingers numb. Then, halfway down the document, I found something worse. A list of procedures. I stared at the words, the letters blurring together. Phase 1, organ mapping. Status, completed. Phase 2, synthetic tissue. Trials. Status, completed. Phase 3, neuro extraction. Status, pending. My stomach clenched. I didn't know what neuro extraction meant, but I knew what extraction meant. My breath hitched. My vision swam. I scrolled further. At the bottom of the document, there was one more section. It was just a single sentence. One last note, written in red. Subject number 86 shows promising results. Proceeding with full body replication. Original specimen will be discarded. I stopped breathing. Discarded. My mind was screaming. I could hear my own blood rushing in my ears, drowning out every other sound. I wasn't just a target. I was a test subject, and they were already making a copy of me, a replacement, and when they were done, they were going to erase me, the man in the mirror. I don't remember the drive to the motel. I barely remember checking in. I just remember locking the door behind me, shutting off the lights, and pressing my back against the wall, my heart racing. I needed to think. I needed a plan. My phone buzzed. A text. No number. Just a message. Check the mirror. My body went ice cold. Slowly, so slowly, I turned my head. The motel room had a large, cheap mirror mounted on the wall across from the bed. At first, it looked normal. Just my own reflection staring back at me. But then, it blinked. I hadn't blinked. I felt my breath catch in my throat. The thing in the mirror tilted its head and smiled. Not a human smile. A too wide, too perfect, skin-stretched smile. My stomach twisted. My knees nearly buckled. I took a step back. It took a step forward. I ran. I didn't look back. I just grabbed my keys and bolted out the door, into the night, as fast as my legs would take me. Because I finally understood. They weren't just watching me. They were replacing me. And whatever was in that mirror, it wasn't me anymore. There's a kind of fear that paralyzes you. A deep, primal terror that roots you in place, floods your body with so much adrenaline that your hands go numb and your legs refuse to move. Then there's the other kind of fear, the kind that takes over, the kind that controls you, makes you run faster than you ever thought possible, think sharper, act without hesitation. That's the kind I felt when I bolted from that motel room. The thing in the mirror, it wasn't me. I didn't know what it was, but I knew one thing for certain. If I stayed, I wouldn't be alive by morning. The highway I ran straight to my car, barely registering the cold air cutting into my skin. My pulse was hammering in my ears, my vision swimming from the rush of adrenaline. I yanked the door open, jumped inside, and slammed the locks down. My hands were shaking as I fumbled with the keys. My entire body felt wrong, like I wasn't in control of it anymore, like my muscles weren't responding fast enough. I jammed the key into the ignition. The engine coughed, didn't start. I twisted it again, harder this time. Nothing. The motel parking lot was empty, silent. The streetlights overhead flickered. I could see the long stretch of highway ahead, leading into the abyss of the night. Then, in the mirror, I saw movement. The door to my motel room creaked open, and something stepped out. I didn't look directly at it. I couldn't. But I saw its shape in the reflection. It had my height, my building, but it wasn't me. It stood in the doorway for a moment, perfectly still. Then it turned its head, not the way a normal person would. It twisted, a slow, deliberate motion, like a mechanical doll being wound too tight, like something that was learning how to move. And then, it started walking toward my car. The engine finally roared to life. I didn't think. I slammed my foot down on the gas. The tires screeched as I peeled out of the parking lot, the back of my car fishtailing wildly. My heart was a drumbeat of panic, my hands slick with sweat as I gripped the wheel. I looked in the rearview mirror. It was still standing there, watching me go. The phone call. I drove for hours, didn't stop, didn't check my phone, just drove. The highway was empty, stretching out in long, endless lanes of cracked asphalt. No cars, no lights, just darkness. At some point, my body started shaking. The weight of it all, the experiments, the case file, the thing in my motel room pretending to be me. It was hitting me, all at once. I pulled off to the side of the road. For the first time since this nightmare started, I let myself breathe. The silence in the car was thick, suffocating. Then, my phone rang. I nearly jumped out of my skin. I hesitated before looking at the screen. No caller ID. I let it ring. It rang again, and again. I couldn't ignore it. I swallowed, my throat dry as paper, and pressed answer. I didn't speak. For a moment, the line was silent. Then, a voice. "Where do you think you're going?" My mouth went dry. It wasn't a question. It wasn't a threat. It was something worse. It was curious. Like whoever or whatever was on the other end of the line was genuinely interested. Like they were studying me. My pulse hammered. I stayed silent, gripping the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles turned white. Then the voice spoke again. "Your vitals are spiking. That's good. That means we're still synced." My breath hitched. Still synced? I opened my mouth to say something. Anything. But before I could, the call cut off. The screen on my phone went black. Then, without warning, my car shut off. The radio died. The dashboard lights went dark. The engine choked and died in the middle of the highway. I tried the key. Nothing. I tried again. Still nothing. Then, from the rearview mirror, I saw them. Headlights. A car approaching, far in the distance, coming up fast. Relief washed over me. I reached for the door handle, ready to get out, wave them down, and then I realized the headlights weren't bouncing. Cars on a highway, especially at night, have a natural movement. The way the suspension shifts, the way the light changes as the car rolls over bumps. But these were too steady, too perfect. The lights didn't sway, didn't flicker. They were locked onto me, and they weren't slowing down. The man on the road. I panicked. I twisted the key in the ignition, slamming my foot against the gas pedal, trying anything to get the car started. The headlights were getting closer. The air inside the car was thick now, suffocating, like the pressure had dropped. I felt something in my bones, like something massive was descending toward me. Then, a figure stepped into the road. I barely had time to react. They came out of nowhere, standing directly in the path of the oncoming headlights. Tall, thin, wearing a white coat. I couldn't see their face, but they were smiling. Not a human smile. Something too wide, like someone had taken a knife and carved it into their skin. The car behind them didn't slow down, didn't even try to stop. And then, the lights just blinked out. Gone, like they were never there. The figure was still standing there, watching me. I felt something shift in my head, like a pressure deep inside my skull. A voice, not my own. "Stop running. Come back." I gritted my teeth, pressed my hands to the sides of my head. Number. And then, the car started. The engine roared to life. The dashboard lights flickered. I didn't think. I didn't question it. I just slammed my foot on the gas. The tires screeched as I peeled away, my body thrumming with the weight of what had just happened. I didn't look back, not at the headlights, not at the man in the white coat, not at whatever was crawling out from the ditch on the side of the road. I just drove, and for the first time in my life, I knew I wasn't getting away. I was just making the chase more interesting. I've read stories about people vanishing without a trace. 1 second, they're here, living their lives, going to work, texting their friends, and then, gone. No struggle, no evidence, just missing. I used to think most of those cases had explanations, a hidden reason. Maybe they ran away, maybe they were taken, maybe they just decided to start over. But now, I know the truth. Sometimes, people don't disappear. They're replaced, and whatever takes their place isn't them anymore. The blackout. I don't know how long I drove. The road stretched endlessly ahead of me, the darkness swallowing the lines in the asphalt. My body was running on pure adrenaline, muscles tense, hands clamped around the wheel like a vice. I kept expecting to see headlights behind me, a glimpse of movement in the trees lining the highway, a flash of something in the mirror that shouldn't be there. But there was nothing, just silence. After what felt like hours, exhaustion started creeping in. My eyes burned from staring at the road. My limbs felt numb. I needed to stop, think, plan my next move. There was an old rest stop coming up. I had passed it 1,000,000 times before, but never paid attention to it. Just one of those abandoned places long forgotten, its bathrooms boarded up, and its vending machines looted years ago. But right now, I didn't care. I pulled in and killed the engine. The headlights illuminated the crumbling pavement, casting long shadows across the overgrown lot. The building itself was dark, the windows broken, the paint peeling. It was dead silent. I took a deep breath. I just needed a minute, a single minute to let my heart stop hammering, to think about what to do next. And then, my radio turned on. I jumped. The speakers crackled with static, the volume rising on its own. Then, a voice. "We found you." I lunged for the power button. The screen glitched. The knobs wouldn't respond. The voice kept talking. "Step out of the vehicle." I felt my stomach drop. I jammed my keys back into the ignition, twisted. The car didn't start. The lights flickered. The radio hissed. The voice whispered, distorted and crackling, but so damn clear. "It's time for your procedure." Then, the headlights behind me turned on. I froze. The rearview mirror was flooded with blinding white light. Another car had pulled in. Or at least, I thought it was a car. The shape was wrong. The lights were too high, too far apart. The thing in my mirror wasn't a vehicle. It was something else. The radio cut out. Then, something knocked on my window. 3 slow, deliberate taps. I turned my head, and I saw myself. The thing that looked like me. It was standing outside my car. Same height, same hair, same face. But the eyes were wrong. Too wide, too focused. Like something was looking out from inside my body. Like something was learning. My own voice spoke back at me. "It's okay. You don't have to fight anymore." I couldn't move. I couldn't breathe. It leaned closer to the window. The corners of its mouth pulled back too far. It smiled. My lungs seized. A feeling of wrongness slammed into me, so overwhelming that my vision blurred. My hands trembled as I reached for the door lock, trying to make sure it was still down. But my fingers never touched it, because at that moment, my reflection moved on its own. Not the thing outside, the one in the rearview mirror. It turned to face me, my own reflection, and it whispered, You were never supposed to see this. The lights went out. The missing time. I don't remember what happened next. I don't remember how I got out of the car. I don't remember running. But suddenly, I was in the woods. The air was cold. My breath came out in ragged gasps. The trees stretched high above me, their skeletal branches blocking out the sky. And behind me, I heard footsteps. Not one person. Multiple. They weren't running. They were walking. Like they already knew I had nowhere to go. The ground beneath my feet was wet, soft. Every step I took felt like I was sinking into something deeper. I didn't dare look back. I just ran. But no matter how far I went, the footsteps never got quieter. They were always right behind me. And then I saw the cabin, a single wooden structure in the middle of the trees. The door was slightly open. Light spilled out from inside. It was my only option. I sprinted up the steps and shoved the door open. The second I crossed the threshold, the footsteps stopped, like they had never been there at all. The air inside the cabin was thick, stale. And then I saw it. A surgical table, straps, tools, a tray full of neatly organized scalpels and syringes. A heart monitor sat in the corner, already beeping, already tracking something. And then I heard a voice directly behind me. "We're ready for you now." The replacement. I don't know what happened after that. I woke up on the side of the road, alone. My car was gone. My phone was gone. But I felt wrong. Like something inside me had shifted. Like my body wasn't mine anymore. I checked my reflection in a passing car window. And for a second, it didn't move when I did. The last email. I don't know how I made it back home, or how much time I lost. But last night, I got an email. No subject line, no sender, just an attachment, a video. I almost didn't open it, but I did. It was security footage from a gas station, and it showed me, standing at the counter, paying for a drink, walking back to my car, perfectly normal, except I don't remember any of it. And then the camera glitched. For half a second, the footage flickered, and in that moment, the thing that looked like me turned to the camera, and it smiled, like it knew I was watching, like it knew it had already won. And then the video cut out. End of file.